about this for a second. How does one single gunshot spark a war that swallows the entire planet and ends up killing over 20 million people? It seems impossible. Well, that's exactly the question we're going to unpack today as we dive into the causes of World War I. So, our whole story, it really starts right here, with a single fateful gunshot on a street corner in Sarajevo. This one single moment, it becomes the flashpoint for a conflict that would literally redraw the map of the world.
I mean, it sounds crazy, right? How could one act of violence set off a global catastrophe? And that's the big mystery we're going to solve together in this explainer.
Okay, so to really get how this all went down, we have to go to the scene of the crime. We're heading to the city of Sarajevo back in the summer of 1914.
So, you've got the victim, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne of the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the assassin? He's this young Serbian nationalist, absolutely furious that the empire was ruling over his people. This one act, that's the spark we're talking about, the one that would set all of Europe on fire.
But here's the thing, and this is so important. That shot, that spark, wasn't the only reason the war happened. No way. It was just the match. The continent of Europe was already a giant powder keg, just waiting for something, anything, to set it off.
So to understand why the whole place was so ready to blow, we've got to zoom out from that one day. We need to look at all these deep-seated tensions that had been simmering in Europe for decades. Let's break down the 4 big ingredients of this ticking time bomb. Okay, here are the big 4 you really need to get a handle on: nationalism, militarism, imperialism, and a super tangled web of alliances. You mix these all together and you've got a recipe for absolute disaster. All right, first up, nationalism. And look, this is way more than just patriotism or waving a flag. We're talking about an intense, burning desire for people to rule themselves. All over Europe, especially in a region called the Balkans, different ethnic groups wanted their own countries, and they were sick of being controlled by these old, sprawling empires. You can imagine the tension that created, right? Then you've got militarism. All the big European countries were basically in this huge arms race, trying to build bigger armies and more powerful navies than their neighbors. But the really dangerous part was the change in thinking. Suddenly, war wasn't this horrible last resort. It was starting to look like a good, even glorious option for getting what you want. Number 3 on our list, imperialism. See, the competition wasn't just happening in Europe. The major powers were all scrambling to grab up colonies and resources all over Africa and Asia. It was like a global game of chess, and all those rivalries just poured more fuel on the fire back home. And that leads us to the final piece of this whole messy puzzle. And honestly, this might be the most critical one. We're talking about the dangerous game of alliances that had split the entire continent into 2 armed camps. So, let's break down the 2 sides. In one corner, you've got the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And in the other corner, the Triple Entente: France, Great Britain, and Russia. What the system meant, really, is that a small fight between any 2 of them could never stay small. It would automatically drag everybody else in. It's like a tripwire for a global war. So, there you have it. That's the setup. You've got a whole continent just simmering with anger, armed to the teeth, fighting over land around the world, and tied together by this fragile web of alliances. The whole thing was just waiting for a reason to fall apart. Okay, so now that we know how fragile everything was, let's go back to that spark in Sarajevo and watch how the dominoes started to fall one by one. And believe me, once it started, it happened fast. First, the shot is fired. Then, Austria-Hungary declares war to punish Serbia. Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's big brother protector, starts mobilizing its huge army. That move triggers Germany's alliance with Austria-Hungary, which forces them to declare war on Russia. And just like that, all the tripwires are pulled, dragging France and Great Britain into the fight, and boom, you have a world war. So when you look back at it all, it becomes really clear you can't just point to one thing and say that's the cause. It wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of everything happening at once. It's almost like a recipe for a world war, right? You start with the foundation of that intense nationalism we talked about. You pour on a bunch of competitive militarism and imperialism, lock it all in place with these really rigid alliances, and then all you need is that one little spark, that one assassination to make the whole thing just explode. And really, that's the biggest takeaway here. The First World War wasn't some kind of fluke or a random accident. It was the logical, almost inevitable consequence of all these pressures and bad decisions building up for years. Which kind of leaves us with one last, pretty sobering thought. When you think about those forces that tore the world apart more than a century ago, this intense nationalism, these military buildups, these complicated international alliances, how many of them do you still see shaping the headlines in our own world today? It's definitely something to think about.